From ancient Palestine, nearly 20 centuries ago, came a strong historic influence, Christianity. Beginning in this town of Nazareth, where Jesus lived and taught, the doctrines of the new religion, Christianity, were carried across the face of the Middle East and Europe. After its founding, much of the civilized world by 1000 AD. At this time, almost the midpoint of the medieval period, Christianity as a way of life had become a dominating factor in the course of world history. The reasons for the truly spectacular rise of Christian philosophy throughout most of Europe and surrounding lands may be found in the answers to these questions. What historic events lay behind the growth of Christianity? What role did Christianity assume in the final 2 centuries of the Roman Empire? What were some of the influences of Christianity upon later historical events? To answer our first question, what historical events lay behind the growth of Christianity, we must return to the period around 100 AD. Palestine, the cradle of Christianity, was at that time part of the great Roman Empire. This, the most massive political institution of the civilized world, had already begun to show evidences of change. Among the problems faced by Romans in the 1st and 2nd centuries after Christ was their growing dissatisfaction with Roman religious life. Many Romans, attempting to find some spiritual meaning in life, continued to follow the polytheistic state religion. Jupiter was among the many gods worshipped, as was Mars. These and other gods, whose cults had originally developed in ancient Greece, were supposedly responsible for all acts of nature and man. However, this polytheistic religion of Rome was not satisfactory to thousands of Romans who formed secret societies to worship mystic Eastern gods imported from Egypt, Persia, and other lands. Among these exotic and appealing gods were the Egyptian Isis and Cybele. A large cult was also devoted to the worship of the Persian sun god, Mithras. These Eastern cults also failed to fulfill the spiritual desires many men sought. But there was another religion from the East that did seem to satisfy the needs of those Romans who were seeking a more personal religion that provided hope in an otherwise hopeless world. To such Romans and their families, missionaries brought the words of Jesus. Christianity, they taught, recognized the individual as an individual, sanctified the family, and emphasized the brotherhood of all mankind. The teachings of Christianity further offered a direct contact or communion with a single God of mankind, and promised a life after death for those who kept faith with the Christ. These missionaries, who were responsible for the growing number of Roman conversions to Christianity, were considered the spiritual descendants of such men as St. Peter, one of the original group of missionaries or apostles, and St. Paul, one of the most effective of all early missionaries. Their missionary work, and the work of those who followed, was made simpler by 2 factors: the well-maintained roads that connected the far-flung provinces of the empire, and the absence of language barriers. Since Greek and Latin were the only 2 major languages of the empire, Christian ideas and ideals were easily communicated. As missionaries gained more and more Christian converts, many Romans, dedicated to the imperial way of life, grew increasingly suspicious of those who practiced the new faith. Romans loyal to the state had little use for the Christians, whose beliefs tended to set them apart. From time to time, the Christians suffered Roman persecution. The first of these persecutions by the Roman government occurred under the Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD. To arenas such as the Colosseum, the ruin of which still stands in Rome, were brought great numbers of Christians who would not renounce their faith. Before great gatherings, the Christians were put to death in public spectacles. But the martyrdom of those who died rather than renounce their faith seemed to strengthen rather than weaken the determination of their fellow Christians, who continued to pray for deliverance. Perhaps the greatest persecution of the Christians came during the reign of the Emperor Diocletian. Early in the 4th century A.D., Diocletian's powers and those of his co-emperors were divided among 6 contenders for the throne. One of these contenders was Constantine. Constantine's ambition was to unify the empire and rule it single-handedly. Early in the 4th century A.D., Constantine moved from Britain against that part of the empire which today is modern Italy. At the Milvian Bridge, near Rome, the crucial conflict of this campaign was fought. As his troops were gathering for this conflict, Constantine claimed to see a vision of a glowing cross in the sky, emblazoned with a motto which, translated, read, "By this sign you shall conquer." The victorious Constantine proclaimed his vision signified he must end the persecution of the Christians, which he did officially in 313 A.D. In addition, Constantine also founded several churches. This church of San Sebastian in Rome contains portions of an earlier church built by Constantine. It is thought that Constantine believed that the empire and its peoples might be bound through the ties of Christianity. By the time Constantine finally brought the immense and far-flung empire under his sole control, around 320 A.D., and established Constantinople as his capital, Christianity had grown into a strong cultural and moral force. Now we can answer our second question. What role did Christianity assume in the final 2 centuries of the Roman Empire? With Christians free to practice their religion, there sprang up among those of the faith a number of different sects, mainly because there was no formal, written body of approved Christian practices. Arguments often raged between the members of the various sects, who identified themselves by medallions or talismans. Those who belonged to the sect known as Arians were particularly violent in their beliefs. There was a growing need for standardizing of Christian doctrines and practices. Here in Turkey, where the town of Nicaea once stood, near the city of Constantinople, a meeting of church leaders took place in 325. The meeting of church officials in Nicaea had been called by Constantine. At the Council of Nicaea, a majority of learned men from every part of the empire approved a set of Christian doctrines, which became known as the Nicene Creed. This creed is the first thorough and formal cataloging of Christian beliefs, a statement of faith that would influence Christians and Christian nations for centuries to come. The unifying effects of the Nicene Creed were implemented by such men as St. Jerome, who first translated the Gospel from Greek into the more accessible Latin, and by St. Augustine, whose book, The City of God, was meant to mold the Christian community together. But barbarian invasions during the 5th and 6th centuries divided the Roman Empire and the Christian community. Christianity in the West began to develop different patterns than those established in the East. In the East, Roman emperors such as Theodosius, who proclaimed Christianity the recognized state religion in 392, and Justinian, a very pious emperor, continued as leading patrons of the Christian movement. It was Justinian who caused this grand church, Santa Sophia, to be built during the middle of the 6th century in Constantinople, now the modern city of Istanbul. Santa Sophia was, for many years, the center of the Eastern Christian Church, which was to become known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. In the West, however, things were quite different. Here, the Germanic barbarians had taken control of government from the Roman emperors. Because of this, the religious leadership in the West had fallen to the Bishop of Rome, who conducted services in this building, the Lateran Palace, partially rebuilt and still to be seen in modern Rome. The early bishops of Rome became recognized leaders of the state as well as the church. In the West, the Christian church became known as the Church of Rome. Thus, Christianity, which had for a time been the bond which held the empire together, would now follow two separate historic patterns as the empire divided. Finally, let's examine the answer to our third question. What were the influences of Christianity upon later historical events? Between the 6th and 8th centuries, the barbarians threatened to turn Europe into a perpetual battlefield. The future of Western civilization hung in the balance. However, the work of the Christian missionaries now brought Christianity to the barbarians. The preaching of Christianity, with its emphasis on moral conduct, did much to avert the complete collapse of Europe. During the centuries of adjustment that followed, the period often called the Middle Ages, the monastic movement and other Christian influences did much to stabilize Europe and provide a measure of unity. But above all, the Christian church became a formal institution whose dignitaries influenced kings and nobles, and whose clergy guided the lives of the common folk. Thus, the Christian church, cutting across national boundaries and rank, helped bring Europe out of an age of chaos. So Christian influences, which had first been transmitted throughout the Roman Empire by devoted missionaries, had by the 10th century spread to much of the civilized world. Christianity was to have an enormous effect upon the historic events of the future, and its influences are directly traceable to those first 1,000 years of the rise of Christianity.